What if the next financial crash wasn't a mistake? What if it was planned? What if the story we're being told about cyclical downturns and unforeseen shocks is the greatest lie of our generation? In the next 23 minutes, I'm going to prove to you that the 2026 crash is a controlled demolition, a deliberate engineered event designed to reshape the world in the image of a select few. And then once you understand the game, I'm going to give you the playbook on how to front-run the people who lit the fuse. The Polycrisis, a system on the brink. The numbers don't add up, and that's the first clue. The storm that is gathering on the horizon is not a typical recession. The mainstream media will tell you it's a cyclical downturn, a soft landing. They are wrong. What is coming is a polycrisis, a term coined by historians for when multiple independent catastrophes, financial, geopolitical, and social, all trigger at once, creating a domino effect so powerful it makes 1929 and 2008 look like tremors before the earthquake. This polycrisis blends unprecedented global debt levels, market overvaluation, geopolitical instability, and currency system shifts in a historic convergence unlike any before. 4 ancient horsemen of the economic apocalypse are riding towards us all at once. And for the first time in modern history, there is no one coming to the rescue. The sovereign debt trap. Empires don't go broke, they erode. First is the sovereign debt trap. Empires have always died the same way, not with a bang, but with a balance sheet. They rot from the inside out, crushed under the weight of their own promises. In the 3rd century, the Roman Empire was facing a terminal crisis. Its borders were too vast, its military too expensive, its bureaucracy too bloated. To fund it all, emperors like Caracalla and Gallienus began to systematically debase their currency. The silver denarius, once the symbol of Roman power, containing over 90% pure silver, was relentlessly clipped and diluted with cheap copper to create more coins from the same amount of metal. By the end of the century, it was little more than a silver-plated bronze coin containing less than 5% silver. They thought they were creating wealth. In reality, they were destroying the very trust that held their empire together. The effects were catastrophic, not just for the state, but for the people. The salaried middle class, the soldiers, the civil servants, the skilled artisans who formed the backbone of Roman society, saw their life savings turn to dust. As the value of the currency evaporated, a desperate barter economy emerged. People abandoned the cities. Society itself began to unravel. They weren't just engineering a financial collapse, they were engineering a societal collapse. Today, the governments of the Western world are doing the exact same thing, but instead of clipping coins, they have a much more sophisticated machine, the digital printing press. As of 2025, the national debts of the United States, Japan, and most of Europe exceed 100% of their respective GDPs, levels not seen in peacetime since World War II. The U.S. federal debt is projected to surpass $36 trillion, with interest payments nearing $1 trillion annually, rivaling key budgetary items such as defense and Social Security. In 2008, when the global banking system failed, governments and central banks rode to the rescue, flooding the system with trillions in bailouts. They were the firefighters. But now, after decades of reckless spending and the unprecedented stimulus of the 2020s, their own balance sheets are stretched to the breaking point. When the 2026 crisis hits, there will be no bailouts. The rescuers are now the ones who need rescuing. The firefighters are trapped in the burning building, and the fire is spreading. But sovereign balance sheets aren't the only weak link. Corporate ones are cracking next. The corporate zombie apocalypse. When money is free, nothing is priced. The second horseman is the corporate zombie apocalypse. For over a decade, central banks kept interest rates pinned to the floor. 0. It was a golden age of free money. A fantasy world where debt had no consequences. But this free money didn't create a vibrant, productive economy. It created a graveyard of zombie companies. A zombie company is a business that doesn't actually make enough profit to even pay the interest on its own loans. It can only survive by taking on new debt to pay off the old debt. They are dead, but the free money allowed them to walk among the living. This isn't new. It's a recurring chapter in the history of financial manias. In the 1720s, the South Sea bubble in Britain was fueled by the same speculative frenzy. Easy credit, combined with a public desperate for impossible returns, created a mania of investment in companies with absurd business models. One company was founded to build a cannon that fired square cannonballs. Another, more famously, was created for carrying on an undertaking of great advantage, but nobody to know what it is. People lined up for blocks to throw their money at it. The mania became so intense that even the most brilliant minds were sucked in. Sir Isaac Newton, the father of modern physics, invested and lost a fortune, the equivalent of millions of dollars today. He later lamented, "I can calculate the motion of heavenly bodies, but not the madness of people." When the bubble popped, these zombie companies were wiped out overnight, taking the life savings of an entire generation with them. As of late 2025, the Russell 3000 index is filled with hundreds of these modern zombies. These companies have grown reliant on refinancing their debt at ultra-low interest rates, but recent rises in rates threaten their survival. Defaults and bankruptcies triggered here could surpass the 2000 dot-com bust in scale and speed. When companies stumble, nations wobble, and the fuse runs into geopolitics. The geopolitical powder keg. Maps change after markets do. The third horseman is the geopolitical powder keg. For 50 years, from the fall of the Soviet Union to the late 2000s, we lived in a unipolar world. A world dominated by one superpower, with one currency and one set of rules. It was a world of fragile but predictable stability. That world is over. We now live in a multipolar world. A world of competing empires and shifting alliances. A world where rising powers like China are openly challenging the old order. A world with a brutal land war in Europe. A brewing conflict in the Pacific. And a global supply chain that is fracturing before our very eyes. After World War II, the British Empire found itself victorious but bankrupt. Its politicians still spoke of its global power, but its finances could no longer support its sprawling military commitments. The Suez Crisis of 1956 was the final humiliation. When Britain, in league with France and Israel, tried to assert its old imperial power and seize the Suez Canal, the United States, its own creditor, delivered a fatal blow. The U.S. government threatened to sell its holdings of British government bonds, an act that would have triggered a full-blown currency crisis and collapsed the value of the British pound. It was the moment the world saw that the empire was an empty shell propped up by American money. Within a generation, the empire was gone, and the pound sterling lost its status as the world's premier reserve currency. Today, the United States spends over $700 billion annually on defense, more than the next 10 countries combined, yet faces exhausted political will and mounting debt burdens. New global conflicts and sanctions increase fractures in the global order built under American predominance. The United States now finds itself in the same precarious position, militarily overextended, with bases in over 80 countries, and facing a world that no longer wishes to play by its rules. Every new conflict, every new sanction, is another crack in the foundation of the globalized system America built. Empires don't fall quietly. Their currencies whisper at first. The dollar's last stand. Reserve status ends gradually, then suddenly. And this brings us to the final and most deadly horseman, de-dollarization. For over half a century, the US dollar has been the world's reserve currency. This is the ultimate exorbitant privilege. It is the secret pillar that has propped up American power long after its industrial might began to fade. It has allowed America to run massive trade deficits, buying real goods from the world in exchange for paper currency it can print out of thin air. It has allowed America to export its inflation to the rest of the globe. But this privilege is coming to an end. The 1971 deal with Saudi Arabia to price oil exclusively in dollars, the birth of the petrodollar, is fraying. And following the unprecedented financial sanctions of the 2020s, where hundreds of billions of a sovereign nation's currency reserves were frozen overnight, rival nations have woken up. They now see holding dollars as a liability, a weapon that can be turned against them at any moment. In the last 2 years, the central banks of China, Russia, India, Brazil, and dozens of other nations have been buying physical gold at the fastest pace in recorded history. They are quietly, methodically, exiting the dollar system. They see what's coming. Gold purchases by central banks totaled over 1,000 metric tons per year between 2023 and 2025, a record pace led by China and Russia, according to the World Gold Council. When the world no longer needs dollars to buy oil, resources, and manufactured goods, those trillions upon trillions of dollars that have been sloshing around the global economy for decades will have nowhere to go. But home. It is the financial equivalent of a tsunami, an ocean of currency returning to America's shores, chasing a finite amount of goods and services. It is the recipe for a hyperinflationary event that will make the 1970s look like a golden age of stability, a sovereign debt crisis, a corporate zombie collapse, geopolitical chaos, and a currency crisis. Any one of these could cause a devastating recession. But they are not happening in isolation. They are all converging. There's one pattern the headlines won't show you, but what if this convergence isn't an accident? What if the storm has a pilot? If this is random, why is it so consistent? The betrayal, exposing the demolition plan. If it looks like chaos, check for choreography. This is where the real story begins. The story they will never tell you on CNN or Fox News. Because this is not a story about incompetence or bad luck. This is a story about control. Because what if this Polycrisis isn't a random confluence of events? What if it's a controlled demolition? The lie of stability. Reassurance is a position, not a fact. First, understand that they know exactly what is coming. They have seen the same data we just went through. Their models are far more sophisticated than anything we have access to. Right now, as I speak, the heads of the Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, and the Treasury are all publicly repeating the same soothing mantra. The system is sound. Inflation is under control. We are engineering a soft landing. It is a calculated lie. And we know it's a lie because we can see what they do, not what they say. In 2021, they told you inflation was transitory. While telling the public not to worry, their own internal reports, which we can now see, show they were running simulations of persistent high inflation. Today, while they project calm, the Bank for International Settlements, the central bank of central banks, is publishing reports on the dangers of a global debt crisis, calling the situation unprecedented. The IMF is warning of geopolitical fragmentation on a scale not seen since the Cold War. They see the same cracks we do. Interest payments on U.S. debt now consume 3.1% of GDP and are projected to rise sharply, crowding out essential public spending. They are also aware that credit card and auto loan delinquency rates are rising, with U.S. credit card delinquencies at a national average of 2.83% in 2025, with spikes of over 30% in some states. They are publicly projecting calm while privately preparing for chaos. Whether this is design or drift, the destination rhymes. Why? It's the first rule of crisis management. You never let the public panic. You keep them docile. You keep them invested in the system, right up until the moment it collapses. The FDIC still insures deposits only up to $250,000, a limit unchanged since 2010, creating a massive gap between what is insured and the total deposits in the system, a fact they downplay to maintain public confidence, because you cannot have a controlled demolition if the public knows it's coming. The Great Reset Playbook. The plan works best when you don't see it. This brings us to the core of the plan, a concept you may have heard whispered on the internet and dismissed as a conspiracy theory. The Great Reset. It sounds like a conspiracy, but it is a publicly stated agenda straight from the mouths of the global elites who gather every year in Davos, Switzerland, for the World Economic Forum. Their founder, Klaus Schwab, has written books about it. He famously said, "The pandemic represents a rare but narrow window of opportunity to reflect, reimagine, and reset our world." They see these converging crises not as a threat, but as a golden opportunity, an opportunity to reset the global operating system, to tear down the old world of free market capitalism and individual sovereignty and replace it with their preferred model, a world of stakeholder capitalism and top-down centralized control. A crisis is the only way to convince the public to accept radical changes they would never otherwise agree to. Changes like a central bank digital currency. Hidden inside the cure is the control. A CBDC is the endgame. It is the holy grail for a central planner, programmable money that they control, money that can be tracked, traced, monitored, and even deleted with the click of a button, money that can be programmed to be spent only on things they approve of, money that can have an expiry date to stimulate consumption. Don't take my word for it. Agustin Carstens, the general manager of the Bank for International Settlements itself, said in 2020, and I quote, "The key difference with the CBDC is the central bank will have absolute control on the rules and regulations that will determine the use of that expression of central bank liability. And also, we will have the technology to enforce that." Absolute control. The technology to enforce it, but they cannot implement it in a time of stability. No free society would ever willingly accept it. They need a crisis so profound, so terrifying, that the public will beg for a solution. A crisis that will allow them to say, the old system of cash and commercial banks has failed. It is volatile and dangerous. Look at the concentration risk in our markets, where the Magnificent Seven tech stocks now make up over a third of the S&P 500's value. Look at our decaying cities, where office space in places like San Francisco sits over 34% vacant. But we have a new digital system, and it will keep you safe. The coming crash isn't a failure of their system, it's a feature. It is the chaos necessary to usher in their new world order. You don't need to believe in orchestration to prepare for the outcome. Who are they? Power doesn't hide in shadows. It hides in structure. It's the question that always comes up. It's not some secret cabal in a smoke-filled room. The truth is both more mundane and more terrifying. It's a network, a self-reinforcing confluence of interests united by a common ideology, an ideology of control. It's the unelected technocrats at the Bank for International Settlements in Switzerland, the central bank of central banks, who meet in secret to coordinate global monetary policy, far from the eyes of any democratic process. They set the capital requirement rules for the entire global banking system, with more power over your bank account than your own elected representatives. It's the ideologues at the World Economic Forum and the vast network of NGOs and academic institutions they fund. They genuinely believe that the world is too complex, too dangerous to be left to the whims of ordinary people. Their doctrine of stakeholder capitalism sounds benign, but in practice, it means replacing the principle of shareholder accountability with a vague mandate to serve society. With them, of course, being the ones who get to define what society needs. It is a backdoor to corporate socialism, and it's the political and financial insiders who understand that the current debt-based system is mathematically doomed and are using this foreknowledge to position themselves for what comes next. This is not the first time this has happened. Far from it. This is the oldest play in the Book of Empire. In 1933, at the absolute depths of the Great Depression, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 6102. With the stroke of a pen, he made it illegal for private American citizens to own gold, forcing them to turn in their life savings, their real, hard money, in exchange for his newly devalued paper dollars. He used a crisis to change the rules of the game overnight and transferred the nation's real wealth from the people into the hands of the state. They have done it before, and they are preparing to do it again. But this time, there is a difference. This time, their plans are not hidden in secret vaults. They are published in white papers and discussed on panels at Davos. This time, we know their playbook. If stability is the promise, why do the fixes demand more control? And if control is the goal, what happens when you opt out? The opportunity, front-running the reset. This is the moment where fear ends. An opportunity begins. This is the pivot. Because if a demolition is planned, its effects are predictable. And if you can predict what is going to happen, you can position yourself to not just survive it, but to profit from it. The story of the Rothschild banking dynasty, the most powerful financial family of the 19th century, was not built in times of peace. It was forged in the chaos of the Napoleonic Wars. By having better information, a faster network of couriers and carrier pigeons, they knew the outcome of the Battle of Waterloo a full 24 hours before the rest of London. While the market was panicking, selling British government bonds on the false rumor that Napoleon had won, Nathan Rothschild was quietly buying. He bought when blood was in the streets. When the true news arrived a day later, the market exploded upwards, and his family's fortune was secured for a century. He and others like him understood the first and most important rule of wealth creation. Crisis is the ultimate catalyst for wealth transfer. Historical data supports this. For instance, after the 2008 crash, the S&P 500 delivered a 178% return between 2015 and 2024, creating enormous wealth for those who bought during the downturn. The coming demolition is the greatest wealth transfer event of our lifetime. And you have a choice. You can be the one whose wealth is transferred, or you can be the one who receives it. So how do you do it? How do you front-run the people who think they have all the control? It's a three-pillar strategy. A strategy not just for profit, but for financial sovereignty. The three pillars of a sovereign portfolio. The first pillar is your war chest, your liquid fortification. When the crisis hits, the first thing that will happen is a liquidity crunch. Credit will freeze, the markets will panic, and everyone will be desperate for the one thing nobody has, cash. The unprepared, those who are fully invested, fully leveraged, will be forced to sell their best assets, their homes, their stocks, their life's work, for pennies on the dollar, just to cover their debts and buy food. You must be on the other side of that trade. You must be the one with the cash to buy what they are forced to sell. Financial advisors will tell you to hold 10% in cash. In the environment we are heading into, that is not a war chest. It's a survival ration. A war chest is a significant allocation ready to be deployed into the chaos. It is your primary offensive weapon. The second pillar is your life raft. The central thesis of the Great Reset is the devaluation of traditional currency. They will print it into oblivion to try and solve the debt crisis they themselves created. It is the only tool they have left. Your life raft is your collection of real-world assets that exist outside their system. Assets they cannot print, assets with a thousands of years long history as real money. Gold and silver. With gold prices hitting record highs of over $2,700 per ounce, it has proven itself as a reliable store of value during times of currency debasement. When the citizens of the Weimar Republic in the 1920s saw their currency become worthless, a single gold coin could buy a house. When the people of Zimbabwe and Venezuela suffered the same fate, those who held US dollars or physical gold survived. Those who held the local currency were wiped out. This is not an investment. This is insurance. Insurance against the inevitable debasement of their paper and digital money. In the 21st century, this life raft also includes the digital equivalent, a provably scarce, decentralized, censorship-resistant asset like Bitcoin. With its capped supply of 21 million coins, Bitcoin offers a digital alternative to the endless printing of fiat currencies. These assets are your ticket off the Titanic. And finally, the third and most exciting pillar, the counteroffensive. This is where you don't just survive, you thrive. After the demolition, after the old bloated, inefficient system has been cleared away, capital will not disappear. It will rush into the new technologies and systems that will form the backbone of the next economy. Your job is to anticipate where that capital will flow, based on a simple principle. The greatest opportunities will come from solving the problems the reset creates. If their new world is one of centralized control and surveillance, capital will flow to decentralization, technologies that give individuals back their privacy and power. This includes not just cryptocurrencies, but decentralized storage networks, communication protocols, and self-sovereign identity systems. Anything that routes around their control will become immensely valuable. If their new world is one of broken supply chains and deglobalization, capital will flow to AI-driven automation and localized manufacturing. The companies that can produce essential goods, from food to microchips, closer to home, with less reliance on human labor and fragile global trade routes, will become the new industrial titans. The outsized contribution of the Magnificent Seven to the S&P 500's earnings growth is a clear indicator of the market's confidence in the future of AI and automation. Look at the companies building the foundational infrastructure for this new economy, not just the flashy applications. And if their new world is one of resource scarcity and energy insecurity, capital will flow to resource and energy innovation. This means next-generation nuclear power, geothermal energy, and the raw materials, lithium, copper, uranium, that will be essential to power this new electrified and digitized world. Investment in local manufacturing and resilient resource supply chains is already on the rise as a direct response to global uncertainties. These are your asymmetric bets, the small calculated investments you make today that have the potential for exponential growth in the chaos of the post-reset world. This is how you go on the offensive. One paradox turns fear into leverage. The world is at a turning point, and the story that is being written is not one of gentle evolution. It's a story of demolition and reconstruction. An old empire of debt is dying, and a new one is waiting to be born. They have a plan. They believe they are the architects of the future. They see the coming crisis as a tool to consolidate their power, to wash away their mistakes, and to build a world of perfect, centralized control. But their greatest weakness is their arrogance. They believe you are not paying attention. They believe that in the depths of the crisis, you will turn to them for safety. They have a plan, but now, so do you. You can see the demolition for what it is. You can see the crisis not as a source of fear, but as a signal that the greatest wealth transfer of our lives has begun. You have the three-pillar strategy to not only protect yourself, but to build your own empire on the ashes of the old one. The choice is yours. Will you be a victim of the demolition, a pawn in their great reset? Or will you be one of the architects? The fuse is lit, the dust is settling, and this time, you're holding the map.